And now let's talk about virtual machines and hypervisors. But before we would appreciate virtual machines and hypervisors, we need to understand what virtualization is. So, virtualization is basically creating multiple computers in another computer. Let me put it that way, right? So, basically, creating multiple virtual machines on a single physical server. Now, we use this, or this technology or this concept is used to make the most out of one server. Because say you want to run an application, that application needs a database, but basically the application wants to use the server to its full capacity. So instead of purchasing another server to use as your database, then you can use virtualization to create another virtual machine on the same physical server and now use that virtual machine as your database, and it will work perfectly fine. So what are virtual machines then? So virtual machines are basically a computer running inside a physical one. Now think of this as an apartment building with many units, right? Each of these apartments feels like a complete home on its own. It will have its own kitchen, it will have its own washroom, bedroom, and maybe a living room, right? One unit inside a complete apartment. That is basically how virtualization works, right? But at the fundamentals, they all share one foundations and structure, and that is the server. So in the apartment scenario, even though all these apartment feels like a separate home, they still have is still in the same apartment. So once the entire building goes down, or once you collapse the foundation, then everything also goes down. Now they run, or we are able to create virtual machines through softwares that we call hypervisors. So, what is a hypervisor?
A hypervisor is a software or a hardware that allow us to create and run virtual machines.
It allows multiple virtual machines to share the same physical server and provides total isolation, right, for each server. So it means that you don't need one VM for the other one to run, right? One VM can be off whilst the other VM is on. However, the host machine, that is a physical server, should always be running. Okay. And these hypervisors also efficiently allocate resources like CPU, memory, storage to each VM when they need it. Now, hypervisors come in two types, the type 1 and the type 2. Right? We are going to explore that in the next slide. But quickly,
let's look at how a hypervisor helps us to run virtual machines on a physical server.
At a high level, you are going to have the server, right? That is a physical machine here, and it comes with its hardware resources like the compute, storage, memory, and then networking. And then on top of the host, you have your operating system installed, and then now the hypervisor comes on top. So once you install the hypervisor, then you can create multiple virtual machines, right, on the hypervisor. So that is basically how hypervisors help us run multiple virtual machines on a single server. So now let's look at a comparison between the type 1 and the type 2 hypervisors. So let's look at the type 1 hypervisor first. So the type 1 hypervisor is also called the bare metal hypervisor. What it means is that it is installed directly on the hardware, unlike the example that we saw earlier. So for a type 1 hypervisor, we don't need an operating system at all, right? It can run on the physical hardware itself like an operating system on its own. It also sometimes comes embedded in a machine's firmware. Okay, so this one directly negotiates with the hardware for resource allocation. So obviously it directly allocates, CPU, memory, and storage to the virtual machines that you are going to run. And it can also detect or flexibly share the resources with the VMs. These are common in, big data centers, cloud providers, and then enterprise servers as well. It is high performing, efficient, and provides stronger isolation. So example of these hypervisors are the VMware ESXi, the Microsoft Hyper-V, and then the Xen hypervisor. So let's look at the structure of a type 1 hypervisor. So at the very foundation, you have the server, And then it has its hardware resources like compute, storage, memory, and networking, right? And then right on top of this server, you have your hypervisor installed. On the hypervisor, then you can now run your virtual machines or create your virtual machines. Type 2 hypervisor, on the other hand, is different a bit, right? So for that one, it's also called the hosted hypervisor, and it's installed on top of an existing operating system. So you need an operating system before you can install a type 2 hypervisor. It runs as a regular application on the operating system, and it relies on the host operating system to negotiate for resources, unlike the type 1 that directly negotiates with the hardware. It is easier to install and manage even for non-technical users, because of course you can just go online, download, and then just install and run it as a normal application. It is suitable for desktop, dev environment, and then testing environment. However, it has lower performance as compared to the type 1, hypervisor, due to the operating system overhead, because the operating system will also be pulling resources whilst the hypervisor also pulls resources. So a typical example is a VirtualBox and the VMware workstation. So let's look at how a type 2 hypervisor also look like. So you have the server and its hardware, and with this one, instead of the hypervisor, you have to install an operating system. Then before you can now install the hypervisor, from there, you can have your virtual machines installed on them. So this is how type 1 hypervisors compares to type 2 hypervisors. So virtualization basically made it possible, right, to maximize the power of servers, to reduce wastage, and prepare the ground for what would come next, and that is the cloud. Now, to summarize on the entire digital world series, we understood that technology influences nearly every aspect of our lives, and we use digital tools daily without really realizing how complex it is behind the scenes. We also appreciated that apps, computers, and the networks form the foundation of the digital world. We understood that computers have two parts, that is the hardware and then the software. We also understood that operating system acts as the bridge between the hardware and the application that we install on our computers. And of course, servers and data centers store and process data in our digital world.
So in the next video, we are going to look at what was happening before the cloud. We are going to explore what organizations were doing before cloud computing came into existence. So if you found this video helpful, please subscribe, like, and share. Turn on notifications so that you'll be notified anytime I drop a new video. The name is still TheKloudWiz, and I'll see you in the next video.